How are you doing today? I am doing fantastic, and I hope you are too. This is the first episode in a series of videos on making procedurally generated planets in Blender. I don't know how many episodes they're going to be, but they will all appear in a playlist on my channel, and I encourage you to watch them all. Each video after this one will cover the techniques necessary for a particular type of planet. This first video will just go over the basics of the blend file I am releasing alongside these videos. You can find a link to the most up-to-date version of that blend file in the description. If you don't know what Blender is, well, it's awesome. It's free open source software for making 3D art and animations, special effects, motion tracking and compositing, and even has a video sequence editor which I'm using to edit these videos. Because why not? It's free. Anyway, it's very powerful. It's used in the film industry and by lots of indie artists like me. It's free and always will be free forever. I love Blender. You should learn how to use Blender, and I'll put a link in the description so that you can download it and start learning today. You're going to need Blender to use my planet generator. I'm pretty new to Blender myself. I've only been doing it for about a year, off and on, learning about it in my free time. So if you've never used Blender before, don't be intimidated. You can get some great results in not a lot of time if you really want to learn. Ask your questions in the comments below. This is going to be a tutorial on procedural texturing in Blender, but it's not a tutorial on Blender in general. If you're totally new to Blender, don't expect me to be covering all the nuances of the interface, hotkeys, etc. That's not what this video series is about. That said, if you're kind of a beginner to procedural textures in Blender, you'll probably learn some stuff, and I'm going to cover exactly how everything works in my texture notes, how they work together in a lot of detail, but that'll come in the later videos. The whole idea of procedurally generated textures is that you can tweak and customize to your heart's content. And that's what this is really all about, your heart's deep and lasting contentment. Let's get right into it. When you open up my blend file, you're going to be greeted by this nice friendly ball inside a box. How fun! As you can see, I've already done all the modeling necessary to render some planets. They kind of look like this, don't they? More or less. Let's start by switching our viewport shading to rendered up here at this button. Wow, that kind of looks like a planet. By default, the materials are set to an Earth-like world terrain, Earth-like clouds, and Earth-like atmosphere. We can render this at any time by going to Render, Render Image. But before we do that, let's take a look at our render settings. Over here on the right, note that we're using cycles. As of this video, Eevee, Blender's other built-in render engine, doesn't play nice with some of the materials. I am also set to use GPU compute, but decide this based on your own system and hardware. In Blender's preferences, under the System tab, you can choose all your render devices and set things up however works best for you. But we're not going to go into detail on that here since it's so individual. I've got denoising turned on. You can adjust this if you like. I've got it turned on and I'm using optics. You don't have to, that's just what I'm using. Again, personal choice and based on your hardware. Under render here, you can see I've got max samples set to 2048, and I've got the noise threshold set to 0.01, which seems to work fine. In Blender 3.0, Cycles will figure out how many of these samples are actually necessary to achieve the desired noise level. On this particular planet, it seems to skip a lot of those samples and it renders fairly quickly. I wouldn't mess with these settings unless you know what you're doing. Before we get to the planet itself, let's take a quick look at our output settings. Here we are at render properties. We can go down to output properties. If you want to change the render size, you can do that here. I'm rendering planets for a game called Cosmic Frontier, and this size is overkill for that. However, it's pretty easy to shrink rendered images down, and rendering larger than necessary just gives you sort of anti-aliasing effect. Eliminate any remaining noise or jaggedness in your render, make everything look nice and smooth, so this is fine. Okay, let's take a look right above this at the outliner. The outliner is separated into two collections. Lights and cameras has our camera and our sun, which is a light, And we've got our SPOB. The SPOB collection has all the parts of our SPOB, which stands for Space Object. Basically, this is our planet or moon. I call them SPOBs because they're called SPOBs in Cosmic Frontier, and the Escape Velocity series of games that preceded it that I make mods for. I'll drop a link in the description for what that's all about in case you're interested. You can see by default we have 3 objects that are turned on for both viewport and render. The atmosphere, which is this nice blue haze around our planet. The clouds, which are these lovely little white things floating above our terrain. And of course, the terrain itself, which is just the ground, the water, land, underneath everything else. There's also 2 other things here. We have a ring, which is currently hidden, and there's something called Shroud World, also hidden, which you can think of it as a layer of clouds that is totally opaque, covers the entire terrain. This is useful for gas giants and terrestrial planets like Venus. Right now we have a certain camera setup, certain lighting conditions, and we're looking at just one side of our world. For artistic reasons, you may wish for those things to change. Let's take a quick look at how to do that. First, let's say we want our sun to be shining from a different angle around our world. Have no fear. It's as simple as rotating the sun lamp. Click on the sun. Click on Object Properties. We can now adjust our rotation on the x-axis, which is going to control how our sun looks around our world. We can click and drag, as you can see, or we can simply type in a number. By default, we use 37.5, but you are welcome to use whatever looks best to you. Now let's change our axial tilt. By default, we have a rather extreme -45 degrees on the y-axis, which you can see if we click to the camera and look at our y-axis rotation here. Once again, you can change this if you would like. And that is all up to you. Do whatever you want. But we'll set that back to -45, which is the default. Finally, you may wish to rotate the world on its axis, either to make a nice spinning world animation or to get a different view of it for a still render. We can do that simply by scrubbing through the frames of our animation. That's right, I've done all the work of animating the world for you, so you can spin it all the way around. The animation is actually split into 2 sections. As we scrub along here at the bottom, which is our playback section of the viewport, or below the viewport technically, we can completely spin the world. However, that is just the first 95 frames. The second 95 frames, the camera is pulled back and the world is slightly tilted. Why is that? Well, if we turn our ring on, as you can see, the ring is now in the camera view and will render correctly. So that's what we do there. We'll turn the ring off. You can use these frame sequences to make a movie file out of it or an animated image, or you can use these frames to just choose a different view that you want to look at. Okay, let's take a look at the procedural textures included with the blend file. We do that by first clicking up here on the shading tab. It's not showing us much because we still have our camera selected. First, let's set the viewport shading to rendered. We have to do that in this tab just as we did it in the other tab. And we can zoom out a little bit if we want with the scroll wheel, or we can use this little button over here, clicking and dragging. When we click the atmosphere, we can see a series of shading nodes. They're very small right now. We can zoom in with our scroll wheel. I'll explain these more in depth later, but for now, let's just see what some of the options are for materials I've already made. If you click here, you can see several different textures for atmosphere, all procedurally generated. So here's Dusty 1, Dusty 3, greenish, weird, pink orange, whatever you want. And of course you can make your own. If you don't want an atmosphere, it's as simple as clicking these off And now it won't appear in your viewport and it won't appear in your render. Let's see what our clouds are. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense for clouds to be in a planet with no atmosphere, but here we are. We have a whole bunch of different clouds. Might have dusty clouds. Not really seeing much there. Pink, orange clouds. Oh wait, these are atmosphere, sorry. Gotta make sure you're looking at the right thing. Vapor clouds. Weird clouds. All kinds of clouds. So, you know, whatever you want. And of course, you can make more. And I will cover that in later videos. But for now, that's how you choose different clouds if you just want to use the stuff that I included. So, but we can turn those off as well. Now, let's look at terrain. Terrain is a little more complicated. A lot of nodes, and I will be going through those in detail in later videos. But as you can see, I have a whole lot of different terrains built in with my release here. Even some weird ones. So you can have different kinds of terrain. You can make your own procedural textures. And if you do, I recommend starting with an existing material, like say this one, and then hit the duplicate button here, or new material, but it makes a copy. And then immediately, don't forget, click this shield here to give the material a fake user. So it looks like that with a little check. Very important. If you do this, you make sure your texture doesn't get deleted by Blender if you switch away from it, like so. Then save your file. That other texture that you just made could get deleted. So always make sure you're hitting that little fake user button, and it's going to ensure Blender always saves it. That's why all the materials here have an F next to them in remembrance of materials lost to unlinking. Or probably the F stands for fake user. If you wish to render your lovely little world or a gigantic nightmare mega world, you can go ahead and click that render image. Or if you want to do a bunch of frames, you can render animation. If you want multiple frames at once, go to Output Properties, right here, and make sure you set your frame start and frame end. Chances are you're probably going to choose 1 to 95 or 96 through 190, based on whether your world has a ring or not. But you can do whatever frames you want. I'm not the boss of you. Okay, that's it. The video is ending now. But this is just the beginning, my friends. More videos are coming, going into excruciating detail on the procedural textures in this file. And they'll be in a playlist on my channel for ease of viewing. I'll even be a nice guy and make sure the playlist is in the correct order. Not that reverse order nonsense like the bad channels do. Boo. Boo to them, but not to me. Not my channel. I order my playlist correctly. I'm just a swell guy like that. Please leave a comment on this video. Tell me if you've learned something, or just if you downloaded my blend file and find it useful, even without me going into detail on these textures yet. Then, like your own comment. Like your own comment. What? That's lame. I know. But just listen. You're going to make it up to me. Are you listening? You're also going to like this video. See? You see it now? It balances out. One selfish like for yourself, one selfless like for me. It's like a trade. Brings balance to the force. Then, go like somebody else's comment too. That way they owe you. They'll be in your debt forever. And not ever even know who you are. Think about it. It'll slowly drive them mad as they try to make it up to you and never can. They'll have to go and like every other comment on every other video they see in the hopes that Any of those comments might be from you. And that will make a lot of people happy. Don't you want to make a lot of people happy? Go be happy too, and blend away, my friends.